Kentucky is more than rolling hills and bluegrass. Beneath its forests and caves lie ancient mysteries that don't fit neatly into any history book. Under the quiet canopy and along the hidden ridges, you find carved stones no one can read, burial mounds that once held strange bones, and circles of rock that seem to hum with a purpose we've forgotten. In the dark below, tunnels stretch for hundreds of miles, and in the wetlands, the ground still hides the giants of the Ice Age. This story isn't just about one place. It's about a whole landscape that remembers more than it reveals. The secret petroglyphs of Red River Gorge, the whispered legends of Kentucky's giant skeletons, the endless black of Mammoth Cave, the fossil graveyard of Big Bone Lick, the quiet ring of stones outside Hopkinsville, and the dangerous carved path known as the Indian Staircase. Taken together, they form a different kind of map of Kentucky, one drawn in stone, bone, and silence. A map that suggests America's ancient past is stranger and far older than we think. There's something unnerving about marks in stone. Paper yellows, wood rots. Bones can burn, but rock holds on. It remembers. Long after the people are gone, after the fires go cold and the stories are forgotten, the carvings stay. In Kentucky's Red River Gorge, those stone messages are still there, waiting in the shadows. The problem is, no one today really knows what they're saying. Most people know the gorge as a place to hike, climb, and camp. It's beautiful in that quiet, ancient way, towering sandstone cliffs, tangled forests, natural arches that look like gateways to somewhere else. On certain mornings, when the fog hangs low and the trees drip with dew, the whole place feels half awake, like it hasn't fully decided whether to let you in. Hidden in that scenery, away from trail markers and overlooked signs, are the petroglyphs. They're not marked on maps. There's no plaque, no "You Are Here" sign pointing toward them. You don't buy a ticket to see them. You stumble onto them, if you're lucky or if they decide to let you notice. Sometimes they sit on a flat rock wall beside a faint path, or tucked beneath a weathered overhang where the ground stays dry even in heavy rain. These alcoves were probably shelters once, places where ancient people camped, cooked, or waited out storms. Somewhere along the way, someone chose to leave something behind, something that would outlast them. Up close, the symbols don't arrange themselves into a clear story. You see arrows, spirals, stick figures, hands pressed into stone, the occasional animal form. Some look like suns or stars, others like constellations frozen mid-motion. A few sets of carvings are crisp and sharp, like they were etched yesterday with careful intent. Others are so worn you only see them when the light hits at the right angle, and then just for a moment they step out of the rock and look back at you. It's obvious they weren't all made at once. Layer sits on top of layer, like a palimpsest carved over centuries. Archaeologists think some of the oldest symbols could be more than 2,000 years old, probably made by the Adena or Hopewell cultures who lived here long before Kentucky had a name. Later, people from the Woodland and Mississippian periods may have added their own marks. And then, much later, there's a possibility that colonial settlers, seeing these mysterious glyphs, traced or copied them without understanding, adding yet another voice to a language they didn't speak. So, what did those marks mean? The most accepted idea is that they were spiritual or ceremonial, a visual language for stories, visions, or rituals. Spirals often show up in cultures around the world as symbols of the sun, time, or cycles. Maybe these spirals tracked seasons, or pointed toward sacred places. Another theory says they were more practical, territorial markers, warnings, or "this is our land" signs to anyone passing through. Then there's the fringe theory, the one that keeps late-night message boards busy. Some researchers and enthusiasts claim certain symbols in the gorge resemble Bronze Age European glyphs, even ancient Phoenician script. Does that mean seafarers from across the Atlantic reached Kentucky long before Columbus? There's no solid evidence to back that up. No ships, no tools, no artifacts to seal the case. But the resemblance is just strange enough to keep the speculation alive. As if that weren't enough, the gorge has its share of eerie stories. People report flickering lights deep in the woods where there are no camps, footsteps echoing from empty rock shelters, whispers in caves with no one inside. Some talk about watchers, shadowy figures seen near petroglyph sites, as if someone is still guarding the carvings. One camping group swears they saw a blank rock wall one evening, only to find fresh-looking symbols there the next morning. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe they missed it in the dark. Or maybe some messages insist on being noticed. What we do know is that these carvings are fragile. Time, rain, frost, and roots are slowly erasing them. Some have already been damaged by people tracing over them or tagging the same walls with spray paint. A A few years ago, a team from the University of Kentucky began digitally scanning the petroglyphs, capturing every groove with 3D models, racing against the quiet, patient erosion of stone. If you ever stand in front of one, alone in the trees, you feel it, this thin, electric line running between you and whoever stood there centuries ago, carving into rock by firelight. You know there's a message. You just can't read it. It's like staring into a fogged mirror. Something is there, just out of reach. And even if we never translate a single symbol, the fact that we're still trying means those people accomplished one thing for sure. They were heard. If the petroglyphs in Red River Gorge are whispers etched into stone, then the next layer of Kentucky's mystery is buried deeper under fields, under mounds, under time itself. Where the marks in rock fade into silence, the stories of bones begin. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, Kentucky newspapers loved a dramatic headline, and they got plenty. Farmers digging new wells, work crews clearing land, curious explorers cutting into ancient mounds. Again and again, the reports followed the same pattern. Someone struck something solid, dug a little more, and uncovered a skeleton. But according to the articles, these weren't ordinary bones. These belonged to giants. The details read like something between archaeology and folklore. Skeletons said to stand 7, 8, even 10 feet tall if reassembled. Long leg bones that dwarfed the men holding them. Skulls described as oddly shaped, sometimes with exaggerated brows, sometimes said to have double rows of teeth. The finds came from all over the state. Lexington, Louisville, Barberville, remote valleys in the Appalachian foothills. And more than once, the bones were reported inside or near burial mounds arranged in circles or careful patterns, as if whoever buried them wanted the layout to mean something. To modern ears, it sounds like a tall tale literally. And to be fair, journalism in the 19th century didn't exactly shy away from embellishment. What we'd call clickbait today was just a good front page back then. But these weren't isolated stories. Over decades, dozens of similar accounts appeared across Kentucky and the broader region. Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Illinois, places where mound-building cultures like the Adena once thrived. So, what was really going on? The most grounded explanation is human error mixed with human imagination. The Adena are known to have had some individuals who were taller than average for their time, maybe 6 feet or a bit more, which, in a world where most people were much shorter, would feel towering. Add in the fact that graves can shift, bones can scatter, and nobody in those days was using modern measuring tools. A long femur pulled from loose soil could easily grow a few inches in the telling, especially if the finder wanted to believe they'd uncovered something extraordinary. But not everyone chalked these reports up to exaggeration. Over time, some writers and amateur researchers began to weave the stories together, suggesting they weren't isolated incidents at all, but evidence of a lost race of giants. They pointed to mound sites across the Midwest and Appalachia, and claimed they weren't built by Native Americans, but by some earlier forgotten people taller, stronger, somehow erased from official history. In some versions, these giants were linked to biblical legends like the Nephilim. In others, they were survivors from Atlantis, or ancient Europeans, who crossed the ocean long before Columbus. Over and over, one name kept showing up in these tales: the Smithsonian. According to legend, many of the giant skeletons were shipped off to the Smithsonian Institution, only to vanish into basement vaults or, some say, be destroyed outright. The motive? To protect a version of history that didn't have room for ancient giants. Here's the pause point. It is true that the Smithsonian collected thousands of skeletal remains in the late 1800s and early 1900s, including many from mounds in Kentucky and neighboring states. It's also true that the way those remains were handled was often disrespectful by modern standards. But when researchers comb through official records, there's no verified 8 or 10-foot tall skeleton, no peer-reviewed study confirming such measurements. And yet, the legend refuses to die. In rural Kentucky, you can still meet people who'll tell you their grandfather helped dig up an enormous skeleton while plowing a field, or that, as a kid, they saw a gigantic skull in a barn before the government came and took it away. Maybe those bones were normal-sized and misremembered. Maybe the stories grew with each retelling. Or maybe there really was something unusual buried in those mounds that we'll never be able to verify. Visit the few surviving mound sites today, and you won't see any mention of giants. Places like Wycliffe Mounds in western Kentucky or earthworks near Ashland are quiet now, just rounded rises of grass, interpretive signs, and a sense of age hanging in the air. Most of the mounds are gone, flattened for farms, roads, and neighborhoods. Whatever they held is gone with them. In the end, The Kentucky giant skeletons might tell us more about ourselves than about the past. They're a mirror of our desire for wonder, for a version of history that's wilder and less certain than the one in textbooks. Maybe the giants were just tall people mismeasured, or maybe they're something we'll never quite pin down. Either way, the idea that the ground could still be hiding a story that big, that's what keeps people looking. And in Kentucky, when the story leaves the fields, it slips underground, into miles of black stone that swallow light and time alike. Follow those Kentucky stories far enough past the mounds, past the fields where the giants supposedly slept, and sooner or later they go underground. Not just a little way into the earth, but miles into it, down into the dark lungs of the state. Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave isn't just big, it's the biggest. With more than 400 miles of mapped passageways and who knows how many still hidden, it's officially the longest cave system on Earth. That alone would make it impressive. But what turns Mammoth Cave from a natural wonder into something stranger is what's inside, and what we still can't explain. Long before tour groups, flashlights, and paved walkways, people were venturing deep into this underground maze. Archaeologists have found woven sandals, baskets, stone tools, and torches made from river cane, left behind more than 4,000 years ago. Think about that. Ancient explorers with nothing but handmade lamps and nerve, walking not just a few steps beyond daylight, but miles into blackness most of us can barely imagine. What they left is almost as mysterious as what they didn't. There are tools, torches, and spent cane sticks lying where they were dropped, like someone set them down and never came back. But there are no hearths, no cooking fires, no piles of bones from meals, no sleeping areas. Mammoth Cave wasn't home. It was a place people entered for a reason, did something specific, and then left. The obvious explanation is mining. Later, in the 1700s and 1800s, saltpeter was harvested here on a massive scale, used for gunpowder and preserving meat. During the War of 1812, this cave helped fuel an entire industry. But those ancient Native Americans were exploring the tunnels thousands of years before saltpeter had any value. Some researchers think they were collecting other minerals, like gypsum crystals or epsomite, possibly for ceremony, trade, or medicine. There's another idea, less solid, more powerful. In many native traditions, caves are thresholds, gateways to the underworld, not necessarily a place of punishment, but a realm of spirits, ancestors, and transformation. If that belief held here, then stepping into Mammoth Cave wasn't just a physical act, it was spiritual. Maybe the journeys weren't about what you carried out, but what you brought back in your head and your heart. One discovery sits like a stone in the middle of that theory. In the 1,930 seconds, deep in a dry tunnel far from natural light, researchers found the preserved body of a Native American man. He'd been crushed under a rockfall, perhaps while digging or crawling through a low passage. The cool, dry air had mummified him. Around him were his tools, baskets, and belongings, untouched for over 1,000 years. His body was displayed for years as a curiosity, labeled and stared at, before finally being reburied. But the question he carried with him never really went away. What was he doing so far from the surface? As time moved on, the cave's mystery didn't fade. In the 1800s, Mammoth Cave became a tourist attraction. Guides led groups through by candlelight, telling stories while shadows jumped and stretched on the walls. One of the most famous guides, Stephen Bishop, was an enslaved man who knew the cave better than anyone. He named chambers and passages Fat Man's Misery, Gothic Avenue, Bottomless Pit. Legend says he also found a tunnel deeper than anything on the maps, a place he never shared, warning others to stay away. Whether that story is true or not, it clings to the cave like damp air. Even now, with LED lamps, handrails, and park rangers, Mammoth Cave plays by its own rules. Experienced cavers report feeling disoriented in familiar passages, as if the cave has shifted when it hasn't. People stray from the path and vanish for hours, then reappear shaken, insisting they saw lights where no one was, or heard footsteps behind them when they were alone. Areas like Corpse Rock, once associated with displayed remains, are hotspots for reports of cold patches, nausea, and the feeling of being watched. Skeptics blame the cave itself, the way sound bounces unpredictably, the effect of total darkness on the brain, the way stale air and uneven ground wear you down. Maybe that's all it is. Or maybe there's something about Mammoth Cave that refuses to be just geology. And the biggest mystery? We still don't know how far it goes. Every few years, someone squeezes through a narrow crack or dives an underwater passage and finds another chamber, another stretch of tunnel. Some sections are too unstable to explore. Others are closed to protect fragile ecosystems and cultural remains. It's entirely possible that deep in those off-limits corridors, artifacts and maybe more human remains are waiting in perfect silence, preserved in the cave's cool, dry breath. On the surface, Mammoth Cave is a national park. A guided tour, a family trip. Underground, it's something else. A place where ancient footprints and modern ones overlap in the dust, where 1,000 years ago and yesterday feel uncomfortably close. People once walked into that darkness with nothing but flickering torches and faith. Whatever they were looking for, it mattered enough to risk getting lost forever. And above that vast underworld, Kentucky's surface still ripples with its own mysteries. Some as big as mammoths, some as small as a stone tool buried beside impossible bones. Come back up from the black of Mammoth Cave, and Kentucky's deep time doesn't stop, it just changes shape. Instead of tunnels and stalactites, you get open sky, rolling fields, and a quiet little place with a name that sounds like a joke. Big Bone Lick. Say it out loud and it feels silly, but the land here is anything but. Tucked into northern Kentucky, it looks ordinary at first glance: meadows, a tree line, a small visitor center with life-sized mammoth statues out front. It doesn't shout mystery. It doesn't need to. The ground beneath your feet is doing all the talking. The name is as literal as it gets. For tens of thousands of years, this spot was a magnet. The soil is loaded with salt and minerals, and long before humans showed up, giant animals came here to lick the mineral-rich mud and drink from the bubbling springs. During the last ice age, this place was like a prehistoric watering hole in the middle of an ancient highway. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, prehistoric bison, huge, heavy animals trudged in from the cold to taste the earth. But the same soft, swampy ground that offered them life could also take it away. Hooves sank, legs slipped, massive bodies got trapped in the muck. Some animals drowned, others broke bones and couldn't escape. One by one, year after year, they died here, their bodies piled up in layers, buried under mud and time, until Big Bone Lick was more than just a spring, it was a fossil trap. By the time European settlers arrived in the 1700s, the earth had started giving those secrets back. Enormous bones lay scattered on the surface, skulls the size of barrels, tusks curling like petrified lightning, femurs longer than a man's leg. Some early travelers thought they'd found dragon remains. Others said they were proof of a lost race of giants. The scale was so massive it felt almost mythological. Word spread fast. Thomas Jefferson himself became obsessed with the bones from Big Bone Lick. At a time when many Europeans believed large animals must still be roaming undiscovered somewhere, Jefferson refused to accept the idea of extinction. He sent people to collect bones, hoping these creatures still wandered the unexplored parts of America. Fossils from this spot ended up in cabinets, museums, and scientific debates across the Atlantic. That's why Big Bone Lick is often called the birthplace of American vertebrate paleontology. This is where the United States first really started taking fossils seriously. But mixed in with the giant animal bones, explorers began to notice something else. Traces of people, stone tools, charred wood, fire pits buried beneath the same layers that held mammoth and mastodon remains. Old French accounts from the early 1700s mention native guides talking about a vanished group, a lost tribe that once hunted the massive animals here. Some versions say they were trampled during a disastrous hunt. Others say the earth itself swallowed them, people, camp, and all. Were those stories literal memories passed down through generations, or symbolic myths that early Europeans misunderstood? It's hard to say. What we do know is that many native nations, Shawnee, Cherokee, and others, saw this place as more than a hunting ground. They visited the springs for healing, honored the spirits of the animals, and treated the land with a kind of reverence. Some oral traditions describe places like this as where the earth remembers, where time feels thin. As the 1800s rolled on, the legends thickened. Newspapers leaned into drama, calling Big Bone Lick the final battleground of an ancient race, hinting that human and mammoth bones found together meant some epic prehistoric massacre. Writers spun stories of towering hunters brought down by the very beasts they pursued. Fringe theorists later tried to tie the site to mysterious mound builders, or even unknown pre-human civilizations. A few suggested it was a pilgrimage ground where people brought bones back on purpose as offerings, arranging skeletons in ways we no longer understand. Most formal research is focused on the animals. What species lived here, how they died, what the climate was like. The human side is quieter, less explored. Part of that is practical. This is now a protected state park, and some areas haven't been excavated in decades. Part of it is respectful caution. If this land is still sacred, Digging too deep risks disturbing more than just fossils. Visit Big Bone Lick today, and you'll see kids posing with mammoth statues, families wandering the trails, white-crusted salt springs quietly bubbling at the edge of the grass. It's peaceful. But if you stand still for a while, maybe in the late afternoon when the light goes soft, you can feel that layered weight. The herds that sank here, the hunters who followed, the stories that didn't make it onto the park signs. Somewhere between the mammoths under your feet and the sky above your head is a missing chapter of human history. Maybe there was never a literal lost tribe, just generations of hunters whose memories sank into the mud along with their prey. Or maybe there's more still buried, waiting for the right person with the right tools to pull another story from the earth. And out beyond this quiet graveyard of giants, Kentucky has more mysteries waiting, some not buried at all, but standing right on the surface in a silent ring. If Big Bone Lick is a place where deep time rises up out of the ground, then the next mystery feels like the opposite, a place that almost disappears back into it. Head west across Kentucky, past the fossil beds and old river valleys, and somewhere outside Hopkinsville, tucked in the right patch of hills and trees, there's a circle of stones standing quietly in the woods, too quiet, considering how many questions it raises. It's not big. Don't picture Stonehenge on a Kentucky farm. The Hopkinsville stone circle is modest, almost shy. Weathered stones 3 to 5 feet tall stand in a rough ring, their tops rounded by rain, their sides mottled with lichen and moss. Depending on who you ask, the circle spans somewhere between 30 and 60 feet across. There's no paved path leading to it, no parking lot, no gift shop, no ranger in a hat to explain what you're looking at. If you don't already know it's there, you could drive by 100 times and never guess that, just beyond the tree line, stones are standing in a pattern someone chose a very long time ago. What makes this site especially strange is how little official attention it's gotten. There's never been a full-scale archaeological excavation. No detailed survey, no glossy published study that ties everything together. Most of what people know about the circle comes from scattered sources. Old farm diaries, local newspaper letters from the 1,930 seconds, and stories passed along at kitchen tables and feed stores. The circle was overgrown and nearly forgotten for years, swallowed by brush and leaf litter, before locals started talking about it again. Theories about who built it fall into familiar camps. Some say it was Native Americans, maybe woodland or Mississippian people who were already shaping Earth and aligning sites with the sun and stars across this region. Others argue it doesn't quite match known native patterns and instead must be the work of early European settlers, a boundary marker or a simple gathering place that was later romanticized into something mysterious. Then there are the people who think it's older than either group, built by some unknown culture that left nothing else behind. Here's the problem. There are no confirmed artifacts, no carved symbols, no tools, no pottery shards you can hold up and date. Over time, a few stones may have been moved by curious visitors or landowners. Some may be missing, but even so, when you step into the center of the ring, it doesn't feel random. It feels intentional, as if someone stood there centuries ago, turned in a slow circle and said, "Here, here, here," placing each stone with care. A handful of amateur astronomers have taken a closer look and swear the layout lines up with the sun. According to them, certain gaps between stones once framed sunrise and sunset on the spring and fall equinoxes. Others talk about the way shadows fall during certain times of year, forming repeating patterns. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe the tree line has changed too much to tell for sure. But the idea that the circle might have been a kind of stone calendar, a quiet observatory keeping track of the turning year, fits neatly into a larger pattern of ancient skywatching sites around the world. Then there's the part you won't find in any academic paper, the way the place feels. Some people who visit the circle talk about a hum in the air. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure. Dogs, they say, sometimes balk at crossing the boundary, planting their feet at the edge of the ring. Birds go oddly silent. In the 1,970 seconds, a group fascinated by Earth mysteries came with dowsing rods and declared the circle sat on a ley line. One of those hypothetical energy paths, believers say, connect ancient sacred sites across the globe. It's not science, but it added another layer to the legend. Over the years, the circle has drawn an odd mix of visitors, meditation groups, paranormal investigators, and quiet, curious people who'd rather sit and listen than talk. Some locals even tie it, loosely, to Hopkinsville's most famous weird story, the 1,955 Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, when a family claimed small goblin-like beings besieged their farmhouse all night. There's no real evidence the two are connected, But in a place already defined by strange stories, it's tempting to imagine unseen threads running between them. Today, the Hopkinsville Stone Circle sits on private land. Fences have gone up. Old trails have faded. The owners aren't eager for trespassers, and the woods have done their best to erase the way in. Still, the stones remain plain, uninscribed, and stubbornly present. No sign explains them. No plaque tells you what to think. Maybe it's just a boundary marker. Maybe early settlers planted the stones in a ring and never bothered to write down why. Maybe all the talk of calendars and energy lines is just human beings doing what we always do, reaching for meaning. But even if the truth is simple, the feeling isn't. In a world where most questions can be answered with a search bar, a ring of anonymous stones standing in a quiet Kentucky wood can feel almost radical. It doesn't solve itself, it just waits. From a hidden stone circle on one side of Kentucky, the story loops back to where it began, the Red River Gorge. Only this time, the mystery isn't carved into a shaded wall or hiding under rock overhangs. It's right out in the open, running up the face of a cliff like a challenge. They call it the Indian Staircase. To get there, you don't follow a big sign or a paved trail. You thread your way through dense forest, duck under branches, and push past rhododendron thickets that grab at your clothes. The sandstone ridges rise ahead of you, steep, layered, and silent. Then, as you round a bend and the trees thin, you see it, a sweep of sloping rock, and on it, a strange pattern of shallow steps carved straight into the stone. From a distance, it hardly looks real, more like a trick of erosion than anything human-made. But as you move closer, the pattern tightens, resolves. These are footholds, intentional, each one chipped into the sandstone by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Up close, the staircase is both impressive and unnerving. The steps are just deep enough for a boot, sometimes less. They're uneven, worn by weather and generations of climbers, sloping in places that make your stomach drop if you look down too long. There's no handrail, no chain, nothing between you and a 20-foot tumble but your balance and your nerve. And yet, someone, a long time ago, decided this was worth the effort. The prevailing belief is that Native Americans carved the staircase, maybe centuries before Europeans ever set foot in the gorge. Some say it could be over 1,000 years old. No one can name the exact culture that made it. It predates written records here, and there's no neat inscription at the top explaining its purpose. It just exists, as solid and mysterious as the ridge it climbs. What makes it even stranger is what isn't at the top. You might expect an ancient village site, a ring of stones, a burial mound, something that neatly justifies the work it took to cut steps into living rock without metal tools. Instead, when you crest the last shallow foothold and pull yourself onto the ridge, you find a long, flat expanse of sandstone. Wind skims across it. Hawks circle below you now, not above. The view stretches out over the gorge in a sweeping panorama of forest and cliff. Scattered across that sandstone, if you take the time to look, are faint carvings, petroglyphs, whispering the same language you met earlier in the gorge. Spirals, stick figures, strange symbols whose meaning slipped away long ago. They blend into the rock, so subtle you can walk past without ever seeing them. When you do notice, there's a jolt of recognition. Whoever carved the staircase didn't just want to get up here. They wanted to mark this place. Some archaeologists and researchers think the Indian staircase wasn't just a shortcut. They see it as part of a ceremonial path, a ritual ascent. The climb demands attention. You can't rush it. Every step is calculated, your body pressed close to the stone, your mind hyper-aware of every shift in your weight. By the time you reach the top, you've gone through something: fear, focus, effort. That's the kind of journey that could easily take on spiritual meaning. Others point out how the ridge offers clear views of sunrise and sunset, especially around solstices and equinoxes. From up there, the sky is wide open, and the horizon lines up neatly with the rolling hills. Maybe this was an ancient skywatching platform, a place where people tracked the turning of the year using the sun's path. Not a scientific observatory in a modern sense, but a sacred calendar written in light and shadow. Then there are the more speculative ideas, the ones that echo the fringe theories tied to the gorge's petroglyphs. Some argue the staircase doesn't fit what we know of local native designs, and must belong to an older, unknown culture, maybe even to travelers from across the ocean, long before Columbus. There's no solid evidence for that, no tools or artifacts to prove such a claim, but for people standing halfway up that stone slope, fingers clenched on a weathered notch, it's easy to imagine almost anything. A more practical explanation says it was simply a hunter's route, a fast way to get up or down the ridge while tracking game. but even that feels off. Cutting footholds into hard sandstone without metal tools is exhausting work. You don't do that just because. You do it because this exact route matters, because this climb meant something. Ask hikers who've done it, and many will tell you the same thing. As you approach the staircase, the forest feels different, quieter. The usual chatter of the woods, birds, insects, rustling leaves seems to pull back a little, as if the place is holding its breath. At the top, with the whole gorge laid out around you, there's a sense that you've stepped onto a stage built for something important, even if the script has been lost. There's no official marker for the Indian staircase, no glossy brochure advertising it. Rangers don't encourage people to seek it out. Some quietly wish fewer would try. The climb is steep, slick in rain, and unforgiving. Rescue teams have had to carry out hikers who misjudged a foothold or froze halfway up. In a world that fences off danger and posts warning signs on everything, this path remains raw, unpolished, and very real. Maybe that's its power. The stone doesn't explain itself. The steps don't tell you who carved them or why. They only ask a question, the same one they've asked for centuries. Are you willing to climb? By now, Kentucky starts to feel less like a state and more like a layered story, one written in stone, bone, shadows, and silence. When you step back and line up all these places on an invisible thread, Red River Gorge, the Giant Tails, Mammoth Cave, Big Bone Lick, the Hopkinsville Stone Circle, the Indian Staircase, you start to see a pattern. Not a neat, tidy pattern that answers everything, but one that suggests the land itself has been talking for a very long time, and we're only just starting to listen. Think about it. In the gorge, symbols are carved into rock shelters and taken up high onto exposed ridges. Spirals, figures, stars, hands, messages from people who never imagined asphalt or power lines, but understood that stone outlives memory. Just beyond those cliffs, stories of giant skeletons cling to old newspapers and family tales, insisting that under plowed fields and flattened mounds lies a version of the past nobody fully recorded. Underneath it all, Mammoth Cave stretches out in black corridors, still hiding rooms and artifacts in its uncharted veins. Ancient explorers walked miles into that darkness with nothing but flickering torches and purpose. Whatever they were doing in those tunnels, mining, ceremony, contact with the spirit world, it meant enough to risk getting lost forever. Above ground, herds of Ice Age beasts found their final footing at Big Bone Lick, where salt and mud built a fossil graveyard that doubled as a crossroads for humans trying to understand the giants they hunted, feared, and possibly honored. Farther out, in a quiet stand of trees, the Hopkinsville Stone Circle stands without explanation, plain rocks in a deliberate ring, maybe marking time by the sun, maybe marking something else entirely. No plaque, no brochure, no easy narrative. Just a feeling that the arrangement matters, even if its meaning slipped away generations ago. And back in the gorge, the Indian staircase climbs an exposed sandstone slope in shallow, risky steps carved by hands that needed to reach that ridge, to stand in that wind, to look out over that view, and know they'd earned it. Taken separately, each of these places is a curiosity, a cool story, a strange headline, but together, they suggest something bigger. That long before highways and town lines, this region was a web of sacred places, crossroads, and mysteries. Caves as gateways, springs as lures, mounds as markers, stones as calendars, cliffs as stairways. The land wasn't just scenery. It was part of the story, maybe even the main character. And here's the strangest part. For all our technology, for all our surveys and scans and satellite images, some of the most powerful questions remain unanswered. We don't know exactly what the petroglyphs say. We can't confirm the giants of the old headlines. We can't trace every path through Mammoth Cave, or say for sure who first carved that staircase or stood those stones on end. The people who did those things are gone. Their names are gone. Their languages are gone. But their choices aren't. They chose to carve into stone instead of just bark or hide. They chose to bury their dead in mounds aligned with sky and land. They chose to walk deep into caves, to gather at springs heavy with bones, to stand stones in circles, to cut steps up cliffs. They made decisions that echo forward in ways they couldn't have imagined, as ghost stories, as legends, as archaeological puzzles, as quiet moments where a modern hiker or camper pauses and feels, just for a second, not alone. Maybe someday new discoveries will connect more dots. Someone might decode a pattern in the petroglyphs, find an undisturbed mound that answers questions about those supposed giants, or crawl into a new passage in Mammoth Cave and find something that changes what we think we know. Or maybe not. Maybe the answers stay just out of reach. But maybe that's the point. Because there's something powerful in the not knowing and standing in front of a rock wall, or at the edge of a mound, or in the center of a stone circle, or at the top of a carved staircase, and feeling the weight of all the people who stood there before you, looking out at a world that was just as mysterious to them as ours is to us. Kentucky doesn't hand over its secrets easily. It leaves them in cliffs and caverns, in salt licks and stone rings, in rumors of giants and whispers of lost tribes. It asks, quietly but firmly, that we keep wondering. And as long as we're still asking what happened here, as long as we're still listening to stone and shadow and story, those ancient voices are still doing exactly what they set out to do. They're still speaking.